Hello, one and all, and welcome to another episode of Baggers Chat. My name's Mitchell Pattinson, and as always, I'm joined by Ethan Daffy, and today we are previewing Carlton v Geelong. Of course, we're coming up against the past premiers, so it's going to be a big test, especially since last week against the Tigers when we obviously drew with them. But obviously, we'll be previewing this massive game. But first things first, Daffy, how are you?
Good, mate. We're straight into the swing of the season. Back-to-back Thursdays makes it really quick, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The back-to-back games. So I don't know if you'd rather the longer wait or the shorter wait, but I think we need the shorter wait because that performance the other night was pretty piss poor. So hopefully they can turn around quickly and get our season going.
Yeah, spot on. So obviously, as you just said, then we play on Thursday night, 7:20, so the exact same time as last week. Not sure if it's going to be the same crowd, but let's hope it is maybe going to be around the same, maybe like 70,000 plus. But of course, it is our first home game of the season, which is good because we can actually see who kind of comes out for our first home game because it's massive, and it also is a big thing to see each club and how loyal their supporters are to try and show up to as many home games as possible. But also every game is great. But we'll now move on, obviously, to the injuries. We've had no injuries come out of our match against Richmond, but we will touch on a very might be vital, but maybe a vital inclusion if we do choose to pick him. But of course, we're talking about Corey Durden, who missed last week. But Corey Durden, Daff, do you play him?
Yes, straight away. I thought we weren't good enough up forward. Our smalls were terrible. That's being nice about it.
Yeah.
As I look on this sheet right now, you look at it's like who does he replace? That's the thing. I just think no one really had an impact. Like none of these guys really had an impact. You look at he's got his goal and Fisher got his goal, but they both weren't very very impactful. But it's tough, Pato. But I think I just said it before, just before I was talking to Mum, I was saying I'm going to bring Durden in. Who do we actually drop? And I think it has to be Jack Martin or it's too tough.
It is tough.
I'll cut the shit and I'll go Jack Martin.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I do agree. I think like we would just quickly touch on our small forwards because as you just said, they were absolutely putrid last week. We have to be real. We have to be our expectations of these players. They need to live up to the standard that we're kind of giving them. And for Jack Martin to have 6 touches, 3 tackles, and 0 goals, Zach Fisher to have 7 touches, 0 tackles, 1 goal, Jesse Motlop to have 10 touches, 2 tackles, 0 goals. Matt Ollies, who, my opinion, will probably keep his spot because he was probably the only small forward that, seeing with those stats there, he actually did. I mean, he didn't do great, but he did better than the 3. So obviously, Ollies also finished with 10 disposals, with 2 tackles and 1 goal. So out of those 4, I think Jack Martin is probably the guy that might have to be dropped. And with Jack Martin, I think you can play him as a medical sub because he is the utility type where he can play midfield or forward. So, and I reckon if we were to bring a player on in the last quarter, not like I'm going to trust Jack Martin to do so in the last quarter, but you kind of think that he's that X factor where if he steps onto the field, he's a good chance to kind of do well. So I completely agree. I think Jack Martin is probably the guy that you would have to drop in because I think you have to bring in Corey Durden because of his speed, his also his X factor in a way. Like I know that we're kind of speaking about Jack Martin and his X factor, but I think Corey Durden with his I think it's just his speed and ball use that we saw at the start of last season. I was really excited by that. So I completely agree. I think Corey Durden has to come straight back in. But now we'll move on to our back line. So we'll obviously touch on each line and kind of preview each matchup, I guess. But to start off, Lewis Young and Jacob Wording up against Tom Hawkins, who we'll touch on a little bit, and also Cherry Garrett, who will also touch on a little bit to see if they will actually be there on Thursday night. But this matchup, Daff, what are your thoughts?
Confident. As confident as I've ever been. I don't know why. I'm just not nothing against their forwards. Like they could come out and kick 5, both those players. They are able to do anything, those 2 blokes, superstars of the game. But the way we played last week, really, if we just cut down the entries, we really, the pressure that Richmond put on our backs the other night, and we still held up, and they only scored 58 points. That's a massive positive. And like Vossi said, if it was last year and we played like that, we would have lost by 6 goals. Our back six just looks more united, and especially these two with Young and Wiedering building that connection like Jones and Wiedering had. I think whenever we come into a Geelong clash, we always think we can get them. We always think we can get them, can't we? Even when we weren't that great, we always had their number a little bit, didn't we? Like even 2020, we beat them.
That's right.
There was a few years like 2017, 2016, I think. There's a few years where we beat them. It was just they're kind of one of those teams I feel like we can knock off most times. Obviously, they're the reigning premiers, so they obviously have to come in favourites. But yeah, with those two, it's going to be tough. I think Youngie, it's another challenge. It is another challenge for the young fella. And if he can really produce a massive performance, then he's going to become, like you said in the last episode, he could become a really top premier defender of the competition, mate.
Yeah, spot on. So out of those two, and obviously their key forwards, who would you put Wiedering on and who would you put Lewis Young on? Because I assume in the past few years, it's probably been Wiedering going to Hawkins because he's that bigger body and Young going to Cameron. And when Cameron goes up the ground into the midfield, I mean, not into the midfield, but just up the ground so you leave Hawkins back, what do you see happening there? Whether it's a Nick Newman going with him, whether it's a Mitch McGovern, if he's picked, who do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think Young probably needs to stay in that D50 for mine. I don't think he needs to push up too high. Obviously, if he has to push up, he pushes up. But once Cameron does push up the ground, then you hand over to a guy like McGovern, and you obviously switch your men. Because I think Cameron and McGovern are very similar, aren't they, in terms of athleticism? It'd actually be the perfect matchup. Then you look at Geelong and they tend to shift a lot of players in different positions. So, Blixards can play down back one game, he could play up forward one game, he can play on the wing. So if they shift something like that up forward, then maybe Young takes Blixards or McGovern takes Blixards. That's why Geelong are so good, because they've got so many strings to their bow that they can change. You can dominate him for a half, and then you swing Blixards in the ruck and he kills your ruckman. So it's like, how does that work out? He's just that much of an athlete. But it is. I think that's where Cameron has his damage. I think there was a lot of instances, especially in that final series last year, where he was that connecting player at half forward, which we lacked last Thursday night. It's so important to have a guy of that quality being able to, feed your forwards. And obviously they've got Ollie Henry now, which is another threat for us, who killed us last year, I think, in that first game. I think round 10 or whatever, he kicked a few in the last quarter. So, and Stengel, as we see here, like, Jesus Christ, man, that's a good forward line, but it's just not my worry. I don't want it to bite me the ass, but I think we can cover it. We've got the quality down there.
Yeah. So obviously then you touched on Tyson Stengel. Who do you think goes to Tyson Stengel?
It's tough because you could go like the way I thought Sardi's defensive work last week was good in terms of pace. I think he can take Stengel. I think Newman's probably more that kind of third, fourth tall kind of, he takes that. I thought he was good last week as well. And Dusty, who's an absolute quality forward, as we know. So I think it has to be Sardi just in terms of pace. But, you could always see, a Doc maybe going onto him here and there and just rotating. But I think it's more about that back six as a collective for mine. I just don't think it's individual based anymore, especially in football these days. It's really about the back six, not the one-on-one. So as a collective, we worked well last week. Just got to do it again.
Yeah. And obviously maybe the last thing we'll touch on, because I might say something else after, but obviously with Sam Doherty, he played 100% of his minutes in the back line, whether maybe he played a little bit of midfield, but I think most of the time he was in the back line and maybe he pushed up the ground a little bit. Do you see him starting back? Do you see him transitioning through the midfield a little bit more? What do you think happens there?
Yeah, I think something's got to change in that midfield. I'm not sure if it's going to be Doc or maybe Fisher coming in a little bit more, or Jesse Mollop actually pushed up the ground a fair bit last week too. He's had a few stoppages at mid time. I think he had a few set of bounce attendances that I checked before. Wasn't sure if I was seeing things wrong but he was actually in that midfield. I just think we lacked speed last week, so I think Doc has to probably stay down back, just in terms of, he's that reliable. You just know what you're to get out of him, and when he's in that back half. But if we are struggling in midfield. We've got to really just change something. We can't let it go on for 2-3 quarters. You know what I mean? But I feel we wouldn't need to make that change. I think our midfielders are quality enough to back it up after a pretty disappointing performance. You got Cheras and Hewitts, as we'll touch on a little bit later. But I like Doc down back.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And also to touch on Jesse Motlop, because as you just said, then he obviously he spent a little bit more time in the midfield, which was very interesting because that's what I thought Zach Fisher was going to do. Maybe have that midfield rotation through the middle. But as we said before with the touches, Zach Fisher he finished with 7 touches, and Jesse Motlop finished with 10. So it wasn't a massive more of an impact, but Jesse Motlop still had a little bit more midfield minutes than Zach Fisher. And I think Zach Fisher, to me, is always more of a midfielder. He just can't get a role in that midfield. So if you have him forward, it's very handy. But now Vossi might be actually seeing where Jesse Motlop is trying, he's trying Jesse Motlop in the middle and might get that X factor where Zach Fisher is a permanent forward, which I'm not too sure how Zach Fisher would think about that, because I know in past years he's come out and said, I think I'm a midfielder and I want to try and spend more time in the middle. But now it looks like he's spending more time forward. So what's your thoughts on that? Out of those two, who would you rather in the middle as that midfield forward rotation?
I'd love them both rotating through, especially with Walshy out. I thought we lacked speed. But for me, you look at Melbourne and Cozzy Pickett on Saturday night. He was playing predominantly midfield, and he's put on 10 kilos on over the pre-season. And he dominated. For me, he's probably best on. Kicked 4 or 5 goals, had plenty of the ball, had that X factor, like you said. If Motlop can turn into something like that, where he can, come in. Even Eddie Betts used to play in the midfield a little bit. Remember, it was like 2011, 2012, 2013. He'd come into the midfield and provide a little bit different, something different. But for mine with Jesse, he's just got to take that next step. He's just got to be able to do the simple things right, where it's tackling, more pressure inside 50, more pressure around the stoppages, getting a lot more of the ball and, impacting the scoreboard, because I don't think he had a shot on goal. That's not good enough for a small forward. So, but yeah, I like him in both in midfield. I like Fish, as I said before, with a Cameron type, where he's that connecting half forward, where he gets it. How many times last year did Fish cut the angles with his left foot? Because his left footers, it's him and O'Brien. They can change angles and really put pressure on an opposition backline. So I like both of them in the midfield, and they're both going to have a big week this week if we want to win the game, really.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Couldn't have said it any better. So now we'll move on now to their midfield that we obviously kind of touch on, but not really. But I just thought that I would pick out 3 midfielders from our team and their team and kind of match them up together. So obviously Paddy Cripps, George Hewitt, and Adam Chera. That's who I think will probably start in the set of bounce up against. Obviously not starting the set of bounce for the whole time, but I guess for the first bounce, these are my 3, and obviously their 3. Dangerfield, Guthrie, and also Bruin, which I was actually quite impressed when I was watching that game on Friday night against Collingwood. He didn't get a whole lot of the footy, but he was quite solid. And I reckon he's that different, the different option through that midfield, where whether you need a Blake Salves going through that midfield or whether you need a Tyson Stengel maybe pushing out the middle a little bit. You got Bruin there as well, and also Max Holmes in there, who's usually is on the wing, but it could also transition through that midfield. So out of those 3, who do you think is the biggest threat? I think there's one name that's pretty scary to me, but what do you think?
Yeah, for me, you look straight at Dangerfield when you look at that. He commands respect the way he's played his football for the past decade and a bit. Always love the way he plays. He's the perfect midfielder these days. He can go forward, kick goals. He's strong. He's got pace. That really, 0 to 100 real quick pace. And like you said with Bruin, he provides something different. But for me, I don't see why we can't win the midfield battle. I seriously don't think, with our potential, I know we say it every week, potential is the most annoying word of football right now, but this team, we've shown how we can kill teams at the stoppage, especially most of the last year. I know this year it's different with teams knowing what we're going to be doing. We've got to find different ways to win the game of football, but around the contest, you look at Cripps, Hewitt, Chera, they find a lot of the football. And, they still found a lot of the football last week. I thought Chera was quiet, had 25. Cripps was quiet, he had 25. So they turned those 25s into impactful 25s, then, I think we really can have a go at this midfield. And with the ruck contest as well, like TDK versus Stanley, like they're probably the right matchup. And I think, TDK can take it up to him. It's just a matter of, when does Radaglia come in at some points? Blixarves, like we said before, they've got so many strings to their bow, like I said. And but yeah, Guthrie and Dangerfield, how good are they? Every game they're putting up 25s, 30s, they're kicking goals. That's why they're a good team. But if we want to be the best, Pato, we're going to have to, beat them in the inside and beat them at the source, as people say.
Well said, Daffy boy. So, and to quickly touch on that is you kind of said then how you kind of look at those names and be like, we're probably a little bit better because we kind of look at it. Clipper, I think, is probably gone past the Dangerfield. Like, obviously, that Dangerfield is still a very good player, but I think right now Cripps is more of a threat than Dangerfield. George Hewitt is more of a threat than Cam Guthrie, and Adam Chera is probably more of a threat than Bruin. So those three, you kind of think, and then also you touch on them that we're also about to touch on soon is the ruck contest. TDK is probably a little bit of a better ruckman than Stanley. So you kind of think about it when you go forward, and like last week, the midfield battle was so crucial to what actually happened in that outcome against Richmond. If we can just win this midfield battle, we then get it forward to the forward line where Geelong's back line is kind of looking down at the moment, and we'll touch on some injuries very soon, but who knows what can happen there. So as you said, if we can just try and keep it out of their forward line and try and test their back line up against Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow, who knows what can happen. So we'll quickly just touch on something else with the midfield, and it's a big name because last week we saw him tag a little bit, which was obviously Ed Curnow. So he was on a Baker and a little bit of I think it was Taranto, but also Bolton. He was kind of shifting towards the three, but I think it was mainly Baker for the whole game. So he obviously had a tagging role. Does he do it again this week? And if so, who does he tag?
I think we really have to let it play out. I think Cripps can take a Dangerfield for mine. I thought Ed Curnow, he actually tagged Prestia in the last quarter of that game. He had one touch. He had one touch in the last quarter. So we almost won the game, really. We probably should have won the game in the end. But yeah, it's tough when you look into a game, who are you tagging in particular? But I think, like we said, we should be in the upper hand. I'm not saying, they're not shit at all. They're very, very good midfield, the way they work, and the players they bring into their midfield and rotate through there, always good. Always good. But with, Ed Curnow, he's that guy, like I said the week before, he's, if you're going to stop one player, you're going to put Ed Curnow on him. You're going to put Ed, he's going to make their life so much harder. And, honestly, with Ed Curnow in the side, I think he has to play. I think he had 15 touches. I thought he was okay. Apart from there's a couple of blunders here and there, but that's what comes with Ed sometimes. But with Ed, he just opens up that space for the midfielders, in my opinion. And he's got that running capacity. 4 quarters. You're getting 4 quarters around at him. He's fit as hell. He's going to run 4 quarters. That's the beauty of it. And for me, the way we didn't even lose the clearances by that much the other night. It was more in terms of we didn't have a clear clearance. We couldn't get deep out of the midfield. Like we couldn't hit up Harry in a one-on-one. We couldn't hit. I reckon they barely had a one-on-one the whole night. And when they did, what happens? They marked the ball. So, it's frustrating, Pato. But Ed Curnow, he's in for mine. I think it'd be stiff for him to get dropped, maybe until a Walsh comes in. But yeah, I think he stays in this week for mine.
And I reckon that's also one of the main reasons as to why we want to try and do the preview as quickly as possible, because we want to try and forget about the past week after a draw or a loss. So we'll move on from that. Yeah, I completely agree about Ed Curnow. I'm actually surprised that he hasn't tagged more in his career, because I reckon he's always been that built, and that's like he has the endurance where he can stay with one of the best runners in the comp. And on the weekend, I think it was just behind Ollie Hollins, who Ollie Hollins also had the highest Ks for the game, which is absolutely fantastic. But I think he was just, he may have been a bit behind Hollins. I'm not sure the exact stat, but we all know that he is a running machine. So if you have Ed Curnow in there tagging as that role, you know that he's going to do quite well, and you know that he's going to do his role. He's going to do his job. So as you just said, then he went to Prestia. That was a name that I was thinking of. I don't think he went to Taranto at all, but he definitely did go to a name that I was thinking of, and it was Prestia. And as you just said, then he had one touch in the last quarter. So he finished with 23. Three-quarter time, he had 22 touches, and Pressy had one more in that last quarter. That was probably when Ed Kerner was probably off him a little bit. So it's crazy how much of an impact he has. So I completely agree. I think if Ed Kerner does play, just because of our midfield of how good it is, I think he probably is only that tagger. If there's injuries, like if there's other injuries in that midfield, that's when you probably need to try and move him into the middle as a non-tagger, because we know how good Ed Kerner is as a midfield. But obviously the last thing we'll touch on is a player who last week looked a little bit nervous in front of the 88,000 at the G. I think it's quite surprising because he's played finals before, but obviously Blake Acres is the player that we're talking about. It's a big chance for Acres to respond this week, because I think he was solid. He had 16 touches. He was solid. Yeah, solid. He was solid, but you know that he can do so much better than that, and he once again would be the first person to say that. So he knows that 16 touches doesn't cut it, and he knows that he's that impact player. Because I had him last week as my point of difference. Like, if he can really start to get the footy, he's that guy who can start to do those chains. Like, he can start to do that as crafty little kicks wherever. Yeah. So I reckon Blake Acres is that point of difference again this week, maybe. So Blake Acres in general, do you see a different role coming in, or do you just see him sticking as that wing? And how do you see his game this week?
Yeah, like you said, I thought he was actually solid. I looked at a fair few of his highlights, and he probably set up about 3 or 4 chains out of our 8 goals. So, straight after the game, I thought maybe he struggled a little bit, but then I looked back on it, and I just looked at a few different highlights and a few different goals we had, and he was a part of those setups. I think for mine, I think we've just got to not lower expectations, but we're not bringing him in to be, a superstar. He's not an absolute superstar. He's more of a he was fantastic last year for Freo, mind you, but like in terms of a winger, you want to probably be getting him about 20 touches a game around there, and he's that big. He's defensively, he's fantastic for mine. I thought he was actually really good last week. There's a few one-on-one contests where he did go back in the D50 when he had to and fly at the ball. But like you said, it's a big chance, and if he can start hitting the scoreboard, if he can hit the scoreboard this week and put pressure on their wingers and their midfielders, to really put pressure on him, and then it opens up the whole game for our midfielders. So it's all about, that's what it's all about, football, being able to take the pressure off your key players. If you've got these guys who are, play probably 5 or 10% above themselves in a game against Geelong, they can really open up different avenues to goal. So, Acres, I think he'll be good. I like the way he goes about it. He's tall. He's got strength. Defensively, I like a defensive winger who can go both ways, because there's nothing worse when a guy goes forward a lot quicker than he goes back. So I think he's more of a defensive-minded player, I think, for mine. And he's going to be important for this Geelong clash, because they've got big bodies, and obviously they're all premiership players. So it's going to be very, very important.
Yeah, crucial week for Acres, but I think he's the type of guy that will respond instantly and actually put in his impact, because he's a part of such a big club now, where he's had that experience where probably the nerves have probably gone past him a little. He's gone like, okay, well, I played that first game where he's, as you said, he still did quite solid for his first game in Navy Blue. So, I mean, all the best for Acres. I think he's the type of guy that will respond instantly. So I will move on now to their RUCK contest, and this is very interesting, because last week we were pretty much confirmed that, well, we thought the Pito would definitely play. And then Vossi turned it on us and played TDK without Pitnet playing at all. So first question, last week with TDK, he didn't get smashed, but he didn't dominate the contest. Does Pitnet come back in?
If he's fit, he comes back in, straight back in. He flies back in for mine. It's just frustrating. It's just really frustrating last week. We just couldn't get any first use in the midfield. Our clearances were little chippy 10-metre kicks to get to half forward, and it gets rebounded straight back out. So, Pito's huge. He throws his body around. He opens it up for our mids once again. Once you relieve that pressure on our midfield, we can get going. And I thought it looked like our midfields are really stagnant in terms of they're just under the pump all game, and we just could not open it up for him at all. I thought Kennedy was slow, really slow. I thought Chera was slow for a guy who's not slow at all. So Pito is in for mine if he's fit. If he's not fit, I don't want him in. I don't want him near the fucking 22, mate. If he's fit, because I know he's had problems with his body last year. So I think he played all right in the Pracky game. I think the VFL team with 6 goals down in the Pracky game ended up winning with Paddy Dow kicking a goal on the siren. So, Paddy Dow, he's another name. But really, with that midfield performance last week, he's pushing down the door with 4 goals. So, Pito for mine in, mate.
Yeah, completely spot on because I think Pitnet and TDK, if he is named, if Pitnet does come in, I think him up against a Stanley or maybe even a Sava Radaglia, or even if it's maybe even if it is a Blixarves going through that midfield as well, because obviously there's a few injuries down back. But my other question on that is TDK. If Pitnet does come back in, does TDK keep his spot?
I think he has to. I thought he played well enough the other night. I really think you have to play him every week. I think he's that type of ruckman. You just need to keep getting games into him. But yeah, if he's a solo ruck, I really back him in this weekend. I thought, Stanley cops a fair bit of crap, and Geelong have copped a fair bit of crap for not really having ever really having a really good ruckman for the last decade. It's obviously cost them finals before last year. They also obviously broke that drought last year. But with Stanley, TDK can hold his own. With Pito, you can really stretch him out because you got a rotation. Pito starts in there versus Stanley, bigger body, better at the taps, throws his body around, and then you go TDK comes in, and then maybe a Radaglia is that second rotation, or maybe a Blixarves, like you said earlier. So TDK keeps his spot for mine.
Yeah, completely agree. I think they both have to be in, and that means that you can have Silvani up forward, nowhere near the ruck. Maybe if it's forward, maybe Silvani goes into the ruck up against whoever, but you need to keep Silvani, and you need to keep Silvani away from the ruck. I kind of think, because that's when you have Silvani down forward, who might play that Jack Martin role where he is that medium forward where he can chase down, he can play a small forward role, but also can play a key forward role as well. So I reckon that's why Silvani is vital to that forward line, and I just think we need to give him a proper crack at it and see how Pitnet and TDK go in their right combination. But now we'll move on to our last line, which is obviously the forward line. It's Harry Mackay versus Charlie Curnow. Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow up against Asava Radaglia, and obviously another name, Sam DeConning. And there's a bit of controversy. Not controversy, but a little bit of, I guess, if SEK is going to play, is he going to be fit? But if he's not going to play, who comes in? So out of those two matchups, and maybe Blixarves coming into that as well, who do you see winning that contest?
Oh, well, for mine, you have to pick the 2 Coleman medalists. I thought DeConning was fantastic on Mackay last year. That was probably the game that Harry really struggled in that Geelong game. We just couldn't find him, and DeConning was just kept going over the back, taking marks on him. He's probably the perfect height for a Mackay as well, and the athleticism. He's quick enough to take on Mackay, but he is 50-50 with an injury cloud, and with Brad Scott. Chris Scott, sorry. There's too many Scotts now, coach. Chris Scott saying they probably wouldn't risk him. They'd rather lose the 4 points. So hopefully he stands by his words there and gives up the 4 points to the Blue Baggers. But with Charlie Curnow and Radaglia, that's where you got to really sort him out. You got to be going for 4 or 5 goals. I thought Radaglia was good the other night, actually, on Cox, in terms of he was a mismatch in terms of height, but I think Radaglia cops a lot of shit that he doesn't deserve. I think he's finally in a position where he can not have to, be too, hit targets too much. He can just take his marks, chip it to handball off to a defender, and they run off. So it'll be interesting. They're both big boys, they're Conning and Asava, so they will have their work cut out for them. But we just got to get Harry and Charlie lead. Hit him on the lead.
Yeah.
Stop popping on top of their heads. Hit him with the lead. Because the other night, Jesus, that was hard to watch at times. It was no easy balls for them. So win it out of the middle. We're going to be winning the game, mate. So, we'll win that matchup for mine.
Completely spot on. And I think so. We'll obviously quickly just touch on the small forwards and how they need a response. We obviously touched on it a little bit earlier in the episode, but You just need a response, tackle, pressure, disposals, hit the scoreboard. Owies and Zach Fisher being the only 2 goal scorers out of those small forwards, not good enough. Not good enough. All right? That is not good enough. You need, and we are so surrounded by pressure. Show it this week. You're up against the Premiers. You need to do it this week. Have to. And obviously, like also there with Tom Stewart being out for 4 weeks, you've got a chance. There's no excuses now. So whether that is maybe a Bose coming in not back into this lineup, but maybe debuting for the Cats, but don't know who that's going to be. But obviously that will come out on Wednesday night when the teams come out. But it's a massive response. You need to respond with this forward line. Not even the small forwards. Harry and Charlie would probably, they were solid last week, but they probably want to try and have more impact on the game. Yep. Whether it's Harry Mackay going forward and Charlie staying back, need to have more of an impact because that's just not good enough. Because we know how good that forward line is, need to be better. Okay. So it feels like I'm talking to you, Duff, as a forward line. Sorry, that was just an absolute spray. But it's just, I know that you completely agree. Just the forward line just needs to be better. And also everyone. I just think every line just need, they would be the first to come out and say we weren't good enough. So it's a massive week this week because we're up against the best in the comp. So to touch on the last thing of the episode, obviously our match predictions, we'll quickly just go through them. So I need your best on ground, point of difference, and winner plus margin, Ethan Duffy.
Best on ground, I picked Cripper and he let me down last week, but I think it's going to be Charlie Curnow. I think he's going to have more of the ball in a 4-quarter effort. I thought he struggled for most of the game. Obviously, still kicked his 3 because he's a superstar, but Charlie Curnow really stretches out their forward line and pops a few in for the Mighty Baggers. And point of difference, we touched on him before. I think he's going to be Blake Acres. I think he's going to have an absolute ripper. I feel like, I thought he was solid, like we said, but I think he can take that a next step and really, really help out our midfield and provide that width like he does. And defensively, he's just fantastic. So that will be huge to really cut off the impact of Hawkins and Cameron as well. If he's going back with the flight, few punches, few marks down back, he can really set us up. And geez, I'm going to pick us again. I wasn't going to pick us, but I think we have to really this is it. You got to turn the corner. This is another tick off. Reigning premiers, MCG, we're all going to be there. Get it done. Blues by point.
A point. Shit, I don't think I can handle another close game. So I'll quickly just touch on my prediction. So best on ground, Adam Sard. Want to see him get 25 touches with 100% efficiency and break the lines. Break them. All right. Test the speed and the momentum of the game and test the speed of Geelong. We're a younger team than them. Test them out. Okay. So point of difference, Mitch McGovern. I've gone the big Gov. He obviously had not the best last quarter, but once again, it's a chance for him to respond. And winner plus margin, I've gone for Carlton as well. I don't think I've ever tipped against Carlton on the podcast, but I've gone for them for 11 points. So is there anything else you want to touch on, Duffy boy?
If we get to a moment in the game where we have to game manage the fucking game. I don't want to be looking back on that O'Brien moment or any other moment again. Just win the game or just win by more that we don't have to worry about game management.
Absolutely.
I want it 5 minutes and it's done. I don't want it close, but a win's a win against reigning premiers, and it will be tough, even with a Stewart out. So, but yeah, like I said, tick it off, Pato. Get it done. We're going to get this win done and get our season moving.
Absolutely spot on. We hope to see all of you guys there on Thursday night. And as always, Daffy boy, up the baggers!